Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast. Bring you energy matters in an informal setting. In today's episode, we won't be looking at the coronavirus outbreak. We won't be talking COVID-19. For that, you can follow the latest developments across commodities, across markets on our Montel Daily Podcast special. This week, we're taking a glance eastwards and looking at Estonia and the Baltic market. This is a country well known for its digital literacy, but many exciting things are also happening in the country's energy space. We have noticed quite a few listeners from Estonia tuning into the Montel Weekly Podcast. So a warm welcome to you. And also, it's a great pleasure to have Kalev, Kallemets, CEO of Fermi Energia, a Tallinn-based company, on the Montel Weekly Podcast. A warm welcome to you, Kalev.
Thank you. Good day from Estonia.
Kalev, I thought, first of all, maybe you could say a few words about Fermi and what you're currently active in.
Yeah, all right. Fermi was a nuclear engineer or a scientist who was the first to set up a chain reaction in Chicago in 1942. That's our namesake, but the company was established last year to very closely study the option of deployment of small modular reactors in Estonia to have carbon neutrality with every weather.
Enrico Fermi, isn't it? The nuclear physicist.
Indeed.
I actually went to school with his grandson, Daniel Fermi, but that's not the topic of today. So let's talk a little bit about the small modular reactors, Kalev. Are these a viable alternative to oil shale power plants in Estonia?
Not now, because they are in the licensing and development in Canada and the United States. SMRs have been a subject of interest for some time, but really now they are in licensing, in development, in a level that is much more serious as a business proposition looking forward. And indeed, the case is in Estonia that the majority of power generation is from oil shale, also was in 2019, 4.5 terawatt hours. But it is the heaviest CO2 carbon emission technology, even higher than lignite, meaning that if the CO2 prices are above 2025, it will be significantly punished by those prices.
Yep, so not profitable at all with carbon, as it was maybe a few weeks ago, not what it is now. But Kalev, can you tell me a little bit about, you talked about the licensings for small modular reactors or SMRs. How far are we away from sort of commercial realization, and in which countries? You mentioned USA and Canada. Would these be at the forefront of the deployment of this technology?
Absolutely. Both Canada and United States are very seriously at the government level investing into development of those technologies and also in the licensing of those technologies. Both the utilities in Canada and the States have many nuclear reactors in development or in operation, and several utilities are considering SMR deployments, most notably Ontario Power Generation, the largest Canadian utility, but also other provinces are waking up to the fact that they have to go phase out coal and build up dispatchable capacities that are carbon neutral. And the same is less so in the States because they have extremely cheap natural gas. But the factuality is that there too, some old plants are getting too old and they have to consider what are the options. And clearly, large reactors are extremely expensive and very dangerous to build, therefore, for any individual business.
But are we talking 5-10 years away from commercial operation?
Yeah, well, the outlook is that the licensing should be complete, for example, for NuScale by end of this year.
Okay.
And then they would go to the site licensing and go to the construction expectedly 2023, 2024. And the first of a kinds would be ready by 2026, 27. And several developers, both light water systems, but also fourth generation molten salt reactor developers, expect by 27 to their reactors to be operational, so that, and this is also our business plan in Estonia, is that if they get ready, then we would be capable in Estonia to seriously apply for Estonian construction license in Estonia for those units.
Maybe they'll be online before Flamanville or Olkiluoto 3, maybe.
I'm sure Olkiluoto will be ready next year. Regarding Flamanville, I haven't been there. I don't know so well, but indeed, the large units are extremely complicated in their nature because of the size.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's been a lot of cost overruns and delays there. So in that sense, the SMRs could provide a different kind of model for the markets that need them. But I'm just wondering, Kalev, so we're talking Estonia, Canada and the US, but are there other areas in other countries in Europe that are looking at this technology? I know potentially in the UK or in the Nordics.
Yeah, well, UK definitely is one of the regions or one of the countries in Western Europe that is most open to new nuclear. They have Rolls-Royce that is government funded, that develops SMR. I have to say, I don't think that the Rolls-Royce has similar capability as companies who have experience with building and developing civil power reactors. But let's see, they've faced definitely a lot of competition in the area. There are multiple developers out there, and I have to say, not all of them will be successful.
Sure. I mean, if we go a little bit into the technology itself, what's the maximum capacity are we talking? Are we talking, anything between 100 and 600 megawatts? And how many could you roll out in a country at the same time?
Yeah, very good question. Internationally, it's recognized that up to 300 megawatts is a small reactor. From 20 to 300, below 20, you're talking micro-reactors. And there are plenty of micro-reactors also in development, which are very suitable for off-grid locations in Canadian or American North, where they burning diesel fuel for power generation, which is quite expensive.
And dirty.
Yes, dirty too. But in Estonia, we're looking at the, let's say, 200, 300 megawatt size for the grid scale baseload power generation, looking 2030s.
Can you tell us something about the cost? What would be the production cost here, the marginal cost of production?
That's a very relevant question. The developers are specifically aiming those 200, 300 megawatt units to be costing less than $1 billion. And they have to be competitive with natural gas in American market, meaning their aim is at $35 per megawatt hour, and they have to meet that range in order to be competitive with natural gas. And unless they don't have a market in North America. I mean, European market is a kind of bonus to American market, so they have to be competitive over there.
That's far below the price, for example, the strike price at which Hinkley Point C the deal was struck there. So, I mean, that's very competitive now, given our current wholesale prices.
Absolutely. And Hinkley Point, the amazing factor is that half of the levelized cost price or the strike price there is interest cost. And because the construction time is scheduled for 7-8 years, and you have a huge amount of billions building up during this construction that you have all take a loan upon, and then of course you have a huge interest. But if you have a construction time of 2 years and the per unit capital down is billion, that's a totally different ballpark.
Absolutely. We'll turn to a little bit to renewables a bit later, but as we see, the European Union is moving to decarbonise its energy system by 2050, or at least reach net zero by 2050. How would small modular reactors fit in a world of renewable energy? Can they coincide? Can they load follow? How does it work, Kalev?
Yes, what I'm not looking is competition with renewables. Renewables have to increase. There is no question. They have to double, they have to triple. But even so, the challenge of switching down coal and gas at the same time, but keeping also in mind that there's a huge capacity of older reactors being shut down in UK, even in Sweden, obviously nuclear phase out in Germany, some older units getting shut down in Belgium, in France, in Switzerland, also in Spain. It's all combined. We're talking more than 200, 300 terawatt hours of generation, dispatchable generation, because of those shutdowns that have to be displaced over the next 10 years. That's a tremendous market, and we don't have to fight with renewables.
Okay, you can coexist.
Absolutely.
It's potentially very interesting. You've mentioned the carbon content of oil shale, but also for those countries and markets that are dependent on moving away from coal, for example, several countries in Eastern Europe, Poland, Slovakia or Hungary. And then this is the small modular reactors would be a very good alternative, do you think?
Absolutely. They're much better alternative than the large units. They are much better alternative than burning gas, where you are still emitting a lot of CO2. And if the CO2 price has to go by 2050 to a level where carbon capture and storage has to be viable, then we're talking 80 euros per ton. And at that level, then only the CO2 cost per carbon cost of gas burning is 40 euros per megawatt hour. So, I mean, a small modular nuclears would easily outcompete any natural gas power generation.
Can you tell us a little bit about the cooperation you have now with Sweden's Vattenfall? How far have you come here? And are other companies looking at what you're doing with small modular reactors, Kalev?
Indeed, we signed early this year in January MOUs with 3 companies. Yes, Vattenfall was one of them. We are studying the construction time of a SMR with them in very close detail. With Tractable, we're studying the siting in Estonia. With Fortum, we study the licensing model, which is based on the safety assessment report done by Canadian or American regulator. So meaning that in Estonia, we would not do independent, full-fledged safety assessment, which would be extremely time-consuming and, that is not done in airplanes or drug manufacturing. And we are having a whole suite of other studies that we are performing this year. So, but those 3 are the most important partnerships that we have.
And these are all well-established nuclear operators, Vattenfall and Fortum in the Nordics and Tractable in Belgium. So they're specialists in this field, would you say?
Yes, and what we have learned is that also it is not very easy to start nuclear new build project right now either in Sweden or in Belgium, or proposition or business case that we're developing. And given that the Baltics will disconnect from Russian grid system, it seems that the market condition in Baltics is potentially one of the best for deployment of a SMR.
If we stick with the Baltic market, how are Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania going to move to decarbonise their electricity production, Kalev?
Before that, the first challenge is actually keeping the lights on.
Okay.
Because, as I said, end of 2025, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania will desynchronize from northwestern Russian grid system to continental European system, meaning the connections to Russia and Belarus will be disconnected. And last year, we imported about 9 terawatt hours from those countries. This will discontinue at that day, meaning we have to increase significantly imports from Swedish price region 4 and from Finland. We'll see whether they have a sufficient capacity to export.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's my next question, because as we see, maybe a shortfall in capacity in Finland, Sweden's decommissioning its nuclear plants, is there enough capacity at times when supply in the region is squeezed? I mean, can the Nordics supply the Baltics as well?
Yes, it's a very good question. I don't see there is a mathematical calculation behind right now, because if there isn't windy time in the Baltic Sea area, then it will be challenging. There, all the most expensive power generation sources have to be utilized to meet the demand, or there has to be this euphemism of demand management of switching down consumers.
But the other alternative is to expand or grow the capacity within the Baltic region. I see SD Energia are looking to expand in offshore into the Baltic. Is this an option or a feasible option?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, wind power generation has to increase, but the fact of the matter is, if you look at the weather forecast every evening in the news, is you notice that depression areas, they don't cover single countries. They cover mostly Northern Europe, meaning that if there is a wind in Denmark, there is wind in Baltics, there is wind in Germany. So that's why we have negative prices.
Absolutely.
And also, conversely, if there is a high, like it is probably tomorrow, then the prices are high and you have to switch on carbon intensive power generation and the prices will go higher.
If we stick to the topic there of negative prices, Kalev, I mean, you've been a bit of a critic here. I mean, is this to do with subsidizing renewables, do you think? Or, I mean, surely it's also a good idea to have a signal that provides the market with a view that there is oversupply, which is what negative prices do.
Yes, you're correct there. This price signal should happen. But what is, I think, what we are trying to achieve in Europe at the same time is that the reduction of the CO2 emissions, meaning that maybe the TSOs or the regulators, they should differentiate who has at those periods access to the market. If there is an overcapacity in the market, maybe the generators who are carbon intensive should be limited out of the market and then maintain some normalcy in the market so that low carbon producers don't get punished. That's a thing that has to be considered.
So you think it's the role of the TSO to come in here and limit the sort of high carbon intensity power generation and let generally the largely carbon free producers produce at will?
Well, that is obviously a consideration that should be given if in European policy is to reduce as much as possible carbon emissions and have low carbon emitters at the market and as much as possible with market pricing and not with subsidies.
I mean, I think generally there is a move to end subsidies across Europe, and I think even new build solar, a lot of wind can exist without subsidies.
Yes, and obviously if there would be no subsidies, I don't think we would see very much negative pricing.
So maybe it's a sort of long-term game here that it's going to happen, but you'd like to have it happen sooner rather than later.
Certainly, because otherwise there is a very significant period where there will be significant economic damage to low carbon producers.
How about SMRs, the small modular reactors? Can they exist without subsidies?
Of course. All the power generation in Finland and nuclear power plants that are planned for levelized cost of 50 euros per megawatt hour, for next 60 years, they are built without any subsidies.
But they have a different system in Finland, don't they? They have the Montel system, which is slightly different from maybe what we seen in the UK and France in a way of financing nuclear.
Yeah, sure. It's not project financing, and this has to be avoided, I think, at every cost. And I think it's very clever and very meaningful, this Montel system. And we try to emulate this as well, because it's fundamentally mutuality, which owners or the consumers of power build themselves a power generation capacity. It's even more engaged relationship for the power consumer than the power purchasing agreements. Mm-hmm. It's power purchasing agreements squared, I would say.
Okay. So more advanced or a version of PPAs then, you would say?
Absolutely.
More sophisticated model, yeah.
And actually 100 years old.
Absolutely. Well, Kalev, thank you very much for joining the Montel Weekly podcast. A fascinating discussion on small modular reactors. I'm sure, we'll hear more of this in the future and we'll come back to this. But for now, thank you very much, Kalev.
Thank you.
That's about all from the Montel Weekly podcast this week. Thank you, Kalev, again. Remember to keep up to date with all our stories on Montel News and follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Goodbye.